This show is brought to you by SafetyFM.
Hi listeners, this is Brent Sutton. Welcome to the 32nd episode of the Practice of Learning Teams podcast show. On today's podcast, I speak to Jim Poesi, a veteran health and safety professional based in New Jersey. Jim shares his story of working in the environmental consulting field, his application of learning teams, and his move into becoming a podcast host with his new short format podcast series called Safety Wars. I found Jim to be very generous with his learnings, and I admired that Jersey boy attitude of keeping it real in the field. Don't forget, next week, starting episode 33, we commence our special series on women's perspective, adoption and approach on the new view of safety and learning teams. The series will be hosted by Glynis McCarthy and will be a podcast discussion with women who represent organisational leadership, industry advocacy, safety practitioner, and regulatory authority. The series is to explore each person's own journey, the role of gender in safety, and the potential of the new view of safety and learning teams. We hope that you enjoy the series as we continue our journey of learning and improving with learning teams. Let us now listen to the host of Safety Wars, Jim Poesi. Welcome, Jim, to the Practice of Learning Teams podcast show. And of course, welcome to the SafetyFM family with your exciting new show, the Safety Wars.
Yes, thank you for inviting me on. It's a very exciting part of my life right now and an exciting time to be alive in this world.
Absolutely. And I think what you'll find is you'll typically have some of the chats with some of the other podcast shows and then you'll never talk to them again. Because that's all part of the podcasting world that we live in.
Well, usually people release things once a week in this format, and you have billions of people in the world. So, not right. But
welcome, and obviously, like all these things, part of the Practice of Learning Teams is to get people like yourselves to come on the show and share your own experiences and some of the learnings that you've had over your career as well. And then we'll wrap up today's show with you talking about Safety Wars and what you're trying to achieve. So Jim, just for the benefit of the listeners, just what makes you passionate about safety? What's the thing that drives you?
What drives me is, I started out in this not really even knowing what safety was back in the early 90s. I won't admit how old I am at this point. And I'm seeing a lot of accidents, a lot of injuries, a lot of people hurt, a lot of people with negative attitudes, negative values, everything else that goes into this, unhappy in their work environment. And I want to make people more empowered. I want to make people safe at work, as safe as possible. I wanted to educate people. I love education. I have a passion for education. And this is what I try to pass on is some of my experiences, some of what I've learned, meet new people, that sort of thing. I've never been one to be satisfied staying in one place. I'm one of those types of personalities that likes to do something, learn all I can, and then move on. And that's been my model, I guess, for my life, going on my entire adult life since the early 1990s. That's
great. And with your passion for education, what sort of drew you to learning teams? Was it through a HOP experience? How did that connection happen?
Well, I started learning. I came up through with the whole thing where we were talking previously on the whole behavior-based safety and everything else. And I noticed that we could not get any traction. I said, if I could find a way of motivating the crew, trying to figure out what makes people tick, what they're about, and everything else, I think I can do a better job. I can help my clients, help my coworkers, help myself. Now there's a little bit of, self-interest here, make my job a little bit easier. So what I ended up doing was I started learning about learning teams right here on Safety FM with all the different podcasts, with your podcast, read a whole bunch of books on this whole thing, read a lot of resources. And what happened, and I said, you know what, this is what I've been trying to do all along here. This seems like a natural fit for everybody. So I've come up through the environmental cleanup field. Primarily, that's where my education is. I enjoy love environmental cleanups. I'm from the New Jersey area, which is right across the river from New York. New Jersey has a reputation of having all these hazardous waste sites. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened was, and that's a story for another day, how that came about. But what happened was all these sites are being cleaned up in New Jersey and in the New York area. Now we're 20, 30 years later, 40 years with some of these sites, they're being cleaned up. So the safety business changed for me. So I got more into the general industry, more into construction, on doing things. And that's not what I'm about. No, I'm not a constructor. Do I know about construction? I know about construction, but I'm not a hands-on person. So when we have a accident or an incident, near miss, what have you, a mishap, whatever we're calling them nowadays, how do what's this about? All right. I get, I get things like carpentry. Okay. That's pretty simple things, not a very simple trade because you got to be very skilled, but some of the other trades like a millwright, a crane operator, iron worker, all these other things, right? It's kind of hard to do safety training or safety consulting or oversight unless you know what exactly that is. So what I try to do very informally, you get to know people, you get to observe, you get to learn and everything else. And guess what? Once you learn with people and you get to know what they're like and, maybe shed some sweat, have some sweat equity in what they're doing, they're more willing to open up and we're able to help them out more with whatever their issue is, right? So if they're having an issue, now you're more or less a team member with them. And that's what the whole idea is, we're learning about their job. Because I don't know about you, and I don't know, but my experience is if you show an interest in what they're doing, they're more likely to open up to you. They're more likely to, and you get a little bit of an education, you get a little bit of what's going on, of everything else that's going on. And hopefully you're going to retain some of that information for wherever your career takes you next, whatever that is. And that's basically how I use learning teams. I don't know if that's what the intention was, but that's what I got out of it.
Sure. Look, I mean, if we look at things purely in a learning background, particularly with an adult ed type background, and my colleague Glynis will be very proud of me because I'm going to mention Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
The fact is that by treating the worker as the expert of their own knowledge domain, that they know how the work really works, by being curious and getting them to share what they do, that very much fits into that hierarchy of need.
Yes.
Because
they get to show off a little bit.
Yeah, well, look, you don't reach a person by them being told. You reach a person by getting them to share their stories, getting them to reflect on what they've heard from others, getting them to, we call it, get them to see things through the lens of others people's eyes. Because if you want that learning to embed and then to build into everyday practice, people have to reflect on things.
Yes.
But the fact is, those types of operators, I mean, what we really focus on a lot at the moment is that when you've got people who work in what's called dynamic risk, where the hazards are the same every day, but the situations that arise are constantly changing and the conditions are changing, the people that do that work really well, that are very, very successful in that work, are people that have honed these critical thinking skills.
Absolutely.
And that skill, if you don't use it, you lose it. And what we've seen is a lot of safety which is, very rules-based, is asking people not to use those skills. Follow the rules. The rules are there for a reason.
Right. Well, we're finding that out current crisis with COVID, where people don't like to follow rules. You give them rules. In this country, you give people rules, whether it's in the workplace or dealing with public health. People don't like to be told. That's our culture here. No. If you can try to work with the folks, right? This is what my whole thing is. And no, it's part of the old way of doing things for the job safety analysis or job hazard analysis, where all my projects that I manage, the client requires a written plan every day, a written meeting every day. If you could help, rather than write the plan for them, the model has always been, here's the plan, follow the plan. Where it's gone to, well, you write the plan, I'll help you write the plan. No, if the man or woman doesn't have good writing skills, of course, I'm going to help them out, give them some pointers here and there. Now it makes it their plan, not my plan, right? And now they're communicating with their work crew. And guess what? They're communicating with their work crew. It's more or less like a learning team that they've set up.
Oh, yeah.
And now everybody's on a learning team.
Yeah, and we call them everyday learning teams.
Right.
And, once again, the strength there is that they are talking their language. They are giving their context. We've got a video coming out in a couple of weeks where we demonstrate a learning team in the field, and we've got this magnetic whiteboard that goes on the hood of a truck, and that magnetic whiteboard has got 4 things on it. It's asking, and we call the model basically. We ask them to think about, what are some of the site and environmental things that they're going to be looking at today. What are some of the tasks and activities they're thinking about? What are some of the things around a mobile plant and machinery? And the last one is thinking about people and protection. And we call it STEP, just STEP. Right. And all it's designed to do as a framework is to stimulate the conversation. It doesn't drive the content, because the content comes from people.
Right.
But once the workers have finished having their rich conversation, someone just basically picks their phone up, scans the QR code on the whiteboard, and it takes all that content and it stores it up into the cloud for the company. And what it does is that when it stores it, it's actually stripping out keywords. So what it's looking for that variation that people are encountering, because that's business intelligence. Forget about people reporting stuff. This is about gathering business intelligence. And the other exciting thing, Jim, is that it also looks at their language and it gives a sentiment score. So it tells us whether the language being used is a positive language or negative language. So if people are saying, the elevated work platform, the delivery's late again, okay, or the site supervisor keeps, yelling at us, it's going to pick up that sentiment.
Well, that's a very good thing.
Absolutely.
To collect more data on this. Because I tell you what, once people get used to technology, they're a little bit more free to speak around it and to act normally, right? With that.
Because we believe that workers, in the industry you're in, workers are problem solvers. They spend all their life solving problems. When you plan work in the morning or when you start your shift, how that work is planned and how that work actually ends up happening is always going to be different. And people have been successful because they've been able to adapt and work around all those different variability and changes that have occurred, because it's dynamic. The environment's dynamic.
Right.
So that makes people problem solvers. So when we ask people to report stuff, you're basically saying, hey, we want you now to hand it off to someone else to problem solve because you can't.
Well, that's an insult to them. And
Correct.
like I said, what do I know? Unless I'm a tradesperson, I really don't know that. So, for example, for 11 years, I worked with an industrial painting contractor almost every day. No, I have 4 or 5 people working for me, and we hand off work as necessary and everything else. But on this one project, I had been there for years. So now I move on over to another project where there's industrial painting. And at a certain point, now all of a sudden, you know about that. You know about that. You know 100% what their job is, and in some cases how to do it, because I basically have a paint inspector background also with this. Now you approach that a little bit differently. Now you're helping them solve their problems and maybe giving them some information. Hey, on other projects, this is the way we've done this. And now you have a different level of respect with the folks, where now you're really an integrated team with them because you know their job on that. And it makes my life a lot easier in a lot of ways. Sometimes not so much easier because you know the way things are supposed to be done. And you are able to identify the shortcuts and everything else that pretty much should not be done. So, and no, in my opinion, just my opinion here, now painting is a very technical field with the coatings and the equipment and everything else, more than what normal person thinks. You take a paintbrush, you paint a wall. That ain't the way it is when you get to that level. And there's a lot of liability with painting. So I like to make sure things get done correctly.
I can imagine those guys have got great visual skills. They're able to look at something. They're able to do some measurements in their head. They're able to, evaluate volumes. Right. There's all the stuff, but those skills, they didn't learn in trade school.
No,
those skills they learned on the job.
Right.
And they learn it through the rich context of speaking in the narrative, if that makes sense. Because what we talk about, what we see with a learning team, where we think learning teams are so powerful, is that people don't know what they don't know. And a learning team takes them from not knowing what they don't know to now knowing what they don't know.
Right. I think the biggest challenge we have, one of them, is with the younger safety professionals. I don't call them safety people, safety guys, safety gals, safety professionals. Yeah. I'm making that a point because that's what we are. And you get out of college, in this country at least, you get out of college and they teach you, because you've just paid $250,000 for an education, that you don't need to know anything else. So they go into the field and all of a sudden, well, guess what? I know everything. And now this is where you get the command and control type safety, right? And what we try to do is, with the younger safety people, the less experienced, whatever you want, however we're going to describe them, we try to get this idea of teams right now. I tell them, for the first 6 months, unless it's an IDLH, immediately dangerous to life and health situation, don't say anything. Ask questions, right? Always ask a question and tag on to someone like me. Follow someone like someone more experienced. It may not be me, but somebody more experienced, and learn the job. Learn what you're going to do. When I see, I had one colleague who went from the construction field into the general industry field. He was a credentialed person from the VCSV. He had a credential along with them. And I said, look, what you need to do is just sit down and do nothing and just take notes for the first 6 months. And that's what he did. Didn't really say anything. And it was an invaluable thing where I said, you have to do this. Learn what the job is, right? Learn what the hazards are. Do research on your own. Do all this stuff, either with a team or on your person. Become a team member on here, because that's one of the big barriers we have, is when we go out there as a know-it-all, or as our friend Jay Allen says, a safety dictator. Sure. You can't do that. right? You have to go out there, work with people, develop partnerships.
I always wanted those big epaulets on my high vis. They have dictators always have those lovely uniforms. They have the epaulets on, on the shoulders, and they have the nice bit of the tassels and the rope. Can we get those for high vis? Because
don't forget the whistle. You got to have the whistle.
Absolutely. It's all part of that fun. And look, Jim, I think what we're seeing here is that people being trained in safety are still being trained in technical safety. They're not being trained in the soft skills or the humanity element of it.
Yes.
So they come out in what we call expert mode, an expert model, which is what they've been trained to do, rather than coming out of it in what we call a facilitative mode, which is about being curious and listening and sort of getting a better understanding, and then link that to your technical mode, which is trying to, I suppose, provide some assurance around it.
We talk about leaders, right? Especially we have that old dreaded annual review that we have to go into. And what's one of the things that a safety person hears? Well, you're not being a leader. Well, what does that mean, right? You're talking safety. We're talking what you're talking about. We're talking what's leadership mean? I don't know. Is there a definition for it? Now, my definition for it is influence. How can you influence someone? One word, real simple, right? Occam's razor, one word. Keep it simple, right? So so when we define leadership as influence, what does that mean? It could be anybody could be a leader. It could be the most educated person on your team or the least educated person. It could be the experienced person or the least experienced person. It could be an older family member if you're dealing with a family member dynamic type thing. It could be the youngest one. All these things, it could be polar opposites of what a leader is.
But let's wrap up now. I'm super excited about Safety Wars, and I'm super excited. And I see your format. You're trying to do little short, sharp kickers. Is that the story? What's your format?
Yeah. Hey, I know how I sound. I know my speech patterns. I know everything else, right? I speak a little bit slow. Years of speech therapy. I could not listen to myself for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Hopefully your listeners are going to be a lot more forgiving than that. All right. And what I said is I can do 1 to 5 minutes. A lot of the podcasts out there, they're very good. Your podcast and all the other ones are excellent, especially on our network here. But they're very corporate, extremely corporate. Nothing wrong with that. That's who you are. As long as you're being genuine, be corporate. All right. So why did I leave corporate America in 2004? A lot of reasons. But one of them was you're trying to put people like me into this little mold. If you're going to, what kind of phrases are we talking about? We're talking about phrases like, hey, if you're going to be here for a long time, if you're going to be here for a long time, or you're going to make your way up the ladder, you got to do this, this, and this. And it wasn't me. Absolutely wasn't me. So what I did was I went out and started off in my first company right after that. And then the current incarnation, JCP Technical Services, and now getting into Safety Wars. I said, you know what? I'm going to be the type of person I'm going to learn my craft, be the type of person I want to be genuine and everything else. And I found out that I'm much more successful. I'm much more happier. I have better personal relationships, everything else that goes along with it, because I got out of that corporate mold. So I'm listening to Todd Conklin one day, and I'm listening to Jay Allen and all these other folks, you. And I said, you know what? This is great. Long format interviews and everything. I'm a fan of long format interviews. Believe me, I've been listening to them since I'm 7 or 8 years old on talk radio in the New York City area. I said, but how about 1 to 5 minutes of really impactful things that people are going to be able to listen multiple times if they want. They'll be able to, if I do a good enough job in being impactful, we do that. The other thing is let's add a little bit of humor, a little bit of comedy. a little bit of, dare I say, anger, right? Enthusiasm, righteous indignation, whatever you want to call it, excitement into this. And let's make safety fun. Let's make safety sexy again, right? As we're able to. You got to make people laugh a little. I find humor, and I say what I want to say, what people are always thinking.
Sure.
Right. So, for example, a comment was made, I won't mention by whom, that people think that you're off your rocker. And I said, you know what? That's not the first time I've heard that people think I'm off my rocker. All right. I said, but what don't they ever argue about? They may say you're off your rocker, but what don't they ever argue about? Content. Mm-hmm. They never argue about what you say. Maybe they'll argue about your delivery. I speak too fast. My voice is too high. I have a speech impediment. They all of the above, right? But they're never going to argue with me. The other thing is this. I had an experience. Again, we'll talk about my religious upbringing. All right. I used to live in Hoboken, New Jersey. My church that my family went to was in Rahway, about an hour away. So I'm young. Hoboken, you lived in the New York area. You know, Hoboken is a very up and coming hip place, especially in the late 90s.
That's right.
Right. You know, party. No, it's like spring break there every weekend. Right. So I'm scheduled to be the lectern, right? The people reading the Bible passage, right? And and I had a very late night, and we'll leave it at that. So I come moseying on into church, and it's for the early morning 8 a.m. service. I get up there in front of the church. There's 10 people, 15 people, and I'm in no condition to read that lesson, friend. None. So I go up there and I muddle through the whole thing. I'm mispronouncing words. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And on the way out of the church, I'm like, man, did I embarrass myself? Do you know what happened? One of the people came up to me, and then another person came up to me and said, you know what? You just proved that anybody could be a lector. And before you know it, everybody else wanted to go up there and read the lesson because I proved that you could go up there and make a fool out of yourself. And now everybody else wanted to do the job, right? Like I said, you got to be careful of what you say to people. You want to be kind. You want to, right? And if I could share a little bit more of my own personal story, what started me on this, right? I didn't know whether I wanted to share this, but I feel like I'm going to share it anyway. All right. So like a lot of adolescents, right? 12, 13, 14, what-year-olds, you're like, well, what am I going to do with my life? Right. And there was a movie, you might have heard of it, Buckaroo Banzai, right? Oh, and you remember that movie?
Yeah.
What was the name of the lead up there? It escapes my mind at this point. It was the guy who played RoboCop, right? He was also Peter Weller, right? Yeah. Peter Weller. And he was doing a promo. And if I ever meet him, I'm going to tell him the story. He's doing a promo for the show, a little interview like we're doing. And they said, well, what's the attraction of Buckaroo Banzai here? Right. And it's an unknown movie. If it weren't for cable TV, nobody would have ever seen it probably. Right. And he said, well, he's a superhero, but he's really not a superhero. He's a normal person who is a rock star, who's a neurosurgeon, who's an advisor to politicians. He's this, and went down a whole list of things, what he is. And he said he does not have a superpower. He has knowledge. He has know-how. He has all this stuff. And I'm sure it was a throwaway line by Peter Weller. It was a throwaway line. You're never going to think about it. That line is that interview and that what he said has been a guiding principle throughout my entire life. So all from a goofy movie that nobody saw in 1983 or 84. So I'm sitting down with a beer about 5 years ago, And I reflect a little bit on what I'm going through. And I said, you know what I said? I said, holy crap, I've become Buckaroo Banzai. Without even knowing it. So what my point is to be kind to people, to be kind. You don't know how your words are going to be misconstrued, so make sure they're positive. Make sure you choose your words with everyone, right? And that's part of what this is with learning teams, isn't it? Right? You got to learn to work with people. You got to learn what they're doing. You got to learn to care about them. You have to have leadership. There's many different facets to safety other than what's in the bookshelf that I have to the right of me here, which is loaded up with about 200 books on safety. All right. It's more than that. You got to have to be in with the people and inspire them.
Yeah. Thank you, listeners, for being part of this podcast. We'd love to hear your learnings from today or other topics you would like us to support you on. Go to www.podcastlearnings.com and be part of the community practice of learning teams at www.learningteamscommunity.com.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.